This morning we were at a class at the Victoria International School in Sharjah, and the children were very receptive and very interested, and it was good.
Young children or
16 to 18.
Oh, okay. I mean, they're
I'm
old
saying
enough.
children, but I should say young men and women.
I do the same thing. At that age, I think they're actually receptive to what you're saying, and perhaps they've read the books. And
They've read parts of the book, and they bought some books. I hope they will read them, but they did buy, so that's good.
Were there any Palestinians there?
There were Palestinians, yes.
How did they?
They came afterwards and asked me things and so on, but so there was one from Gaza, for example, who I think it's much more difficult when you're a Palestinian or a Syrian at this point. When you are outside, much more difficult than when you are inside, because you hear things and you can't make out exactly what is the situation. So they wanted to know more, and they were interested in my experience, but they were shy, young people.
Because you're a famous man.
So I think they're shy.
That's what young people are. In your book, Palestinian Walks, which won the Orwell Prize, you talked about, during the writing of it, how you felt like a stranger in your own country. Do you still feel like that?
Yes, I do, more and more so. And I think there's one aspect of feeling a stranger in your own country which is almost universal, because as you grow older also, you're used to knowing everybody on the street, and then as you grow older and the more generations come whom you don't know, you feel that you don't know everybody as you used to. Right. And that also, as the city that you're living in, or the village even, expands, then you begin to feel, sometimes even get lost in your own place. And there's also, I think, a feeling of strangeness, a feeling of being a stranger that many authors feel.
Right.
But I think in my case as a Palestinian, there's something very particular, which is that, and this is what I try to portray in Palestinian Walks, which is that all around me there is a new geography. Right. So you look around and you see changes in the land that you know, and this makes you feel like a stranger. And also that the land is vanishing, which even compounds the difficulties of experiencing the land.
One of the things that has always interested me about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is that it's not merely a conflict about politics and about ideas, but it's also about a physical space, about occupying that physical space, but also about changing it to a large degree. And that's something, I think, for example, in Palestinian Walks, because you change the time of the walks, but to a degree you haven't changed the place.
Well, I had done a lot of writing on the land question from a legal aspect. And in Palestinian Walks, I tried to do something entirely different. And I tried to combine my various interests, my interest in walking, my interest in the law, my interest in the writing, and decided to write about 6 walks that I've taken over a period of 25 years. And it was not easy to find a way of doing it, but then I settled on taking the walk that starts when I was much younger in 1979 in a particular region, and then describing that walk, describing the land, how it was, and so on, and then ending that walk with the changes to the same path, same trail that have occurred in the course of these 25 years. And in the course of that, introduce the reader to the legal aspects, to cases, land cases that I handled and how they turned out. So in a gentle way, the reader gets to know about the political as well as the legal aspects, as well as the geography. It was my intention also to preserve, I said to preserve in words what is vanishing, because many of the places that I wrote about in Palestinian Walks are no longer there. They have vanished because they have been built up. And many of the places that I describe and call by their original name, many of the young people now, and even old people, no longer know these names. Because the Israelis, one of the things they're doing is renaming these places. And eventually and slowly, Now people are referring to a certain crossroad by the name that the Israelis have given it.
Right.
And they stopped even realizing what is the original name of that place, which is very sad and disturbing.
Well, people have described Palestinian Walks as a travel book, but in a sense, it's really about a description of one place that almost becomes a different country during the course of the 25, 30 years that you've described.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I'm happy that it is described as a travel book, because this increases the number of people who would be reading it, because there are so many books on the Middle East and so many people who are tired of reading about the conflict. And so I think one of the ways in which the book was successful is it was well received by people who enjoy walking, who found that this is a book they can relate to, because it combines the love of walking and the love of the land, and also takes people on the walk, you know.
Are you very hopeful about what's currently happening in Palestine, the political moves? Do you feel that there might be a resolution anytime soon?
You know, I'm an incorrigible optimist, and unfortunately I find no colleagues in optimism. I keep asking people, are you hopeful? And I haven't found a single person who is hopeful. In fact, one person said, even if I see the agreement for peace, I wouldn't believe it, which is a terrible thing. But I think this is a mechanism for safeguarding oneself from despair. I feel hopeful, yes, I feel hopeful. I think there are so many changes that have occurred in the region, and so many changes in Israel and in the supporters of Israel around the world, and in the fear of so many of them about the future of Israel, that there are real changes that we cannot disregard when we assess the situation. And I think that the boycott movement and sanctions will play a very important and successful role, and will make all the difference, because as long as Israel is not suffering from the occupation is lucrative. Why should they change? There's no example in history where people simply withdrew because they felt bad about being occupiers or conquerors. And Israel is extremely powerful. So unless pressure is put, and we see the beginnings of pressure, nothing will happen. I want to say something which is I've realized recently. For many, many years, I would always say that international law should be implemented and applied to Israel. And I would find blank faces, and sometimes it made me feel either I'm mad or I'm naive, or maybe even a criminal to suggest something as preposterous as that. Now, lo and behold, you hear Germany, which has been the strongest friend and defender and supporter of Israel, saying, sorry, but the ethics committee, this was, I think, said by the Scandinavian country, Norway maybe, but the same thing is essentially being said also by Germany. Ethics committee and international law does not allow us to deal with banks who support settlements which are illegal under international law. Finally, after half a century almost, now they've woken up to the fact that, and international hasn't changed, and it's always been quite clear cut about illegal settlements and the illegality of an occupier moving its people to the occupied territory. It hasn't changed at all, and they knew all about it, and yet nothing has happened. Finally, they are beginning to talk about it, and I say, thank God I've lived to see this.